Have you ever experienced that strange moment when you walk into a place you are absolutely certain you have never visited before, yet something deep inside you insists that you have already been there? Not as a vague idea, not as imagination, but as a sudden, undeniable certainty. For a brief second, time seems to hesitate. Your attention sharpens. Your body reacts before your mind can explain anything. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, the feeling dissolves, leaving behind confusion, curiosity, and sometimes even discomfort. This experience is so common that most people brush it off without much thought, yet so powerful that nearly everyone remembers the first time it happened to them. We call it déjà vu, but naming it does very little to explain what is actually happening inside the brain. Déjà vu is often described as a memory glitch, but that description is misleading. When you feel déjà vu, you are not recalling a specific event from your past. There is no clear image, no scene you can replay, no concrete memory you can point to and say, "That's it, that's when this happened before." Instead, what you experience is something far stranger, a powerful sense of familiarity without any identifiable source. It feels as if the present moment has already been processed, already lived, already stored somewhere inside your mind, even though logic tells you that this cannot be true. This contradiction is precisely what makes déjà vu so unsettling. It is not just a feeling. It is your brain making a claim about reality that your conscious mind cannot verify. To understand why this happens, we need to let go of the idea that memory works like a recording device. Your brain does not store experiences as complete, intact videos that can be replayed on demand. Memory is fragmented, distributed, and deeply tied to perception and prediction. In fact, one of the brain's most important jobs is not remembering the past, but anticipating the future. Every second, your brain is predicting what will happen next based on patterns it has learned over time. These predictions allow you to react faster, move more efficiently, and survive in a complex and unpredictable world. Most of the time, you are not consciously aware of this process. You simply experience reality as smooth, continuous, and coherent. At the heart of this system lies a subtle but crucial distinction: the difference between recognition and recall. Recognition is the feeling that something is familiar. Recall is the ability to retrieve specific details about that thing. These two processes are related, but they are not the same, and they do not always activate together. You can recognize a face without remembering where you met the person. You can feel that a word sounds familiar without recalling its meaning. Déjà vu occurs when this separation becomes extreme, when recognition activates powerfully while recall fails completely. The brain signals, "This is familiar," but provides no explanation for why. This feeling of familiarity is not random. It is generated by specific neural systems that evolved to help you navigate the world safely. Familiar environments are usually less dangerous than unfamiliar ones. When something feels familiar, your brain relaxes slightly, conserving energy and reducing unnecessary alertness. This system works so well that it operates faster than conscious thought. By the time you consciously register what you are seeing, your brain may have already labeled it as known or unknown. Déjà vu happens when this labeling process misfires, when the brain prematurely tags a present experience as familiar before it has been fully processed. One of the most compelling explanations for déjà vu involves timing. The brain is not a single, unified processor. It is a network of specialized systems that communicate with each other at incredible speeds. Visual information, for example, travels through multiple pathways before it reaches conscious awareness. Under certain conditions, a tiny delay or mismatch can occur between these pathways. When this happens, the same information may reach different parts of the brain at slightly different times. The result is subtle but profound. The second arrival of the information is interpreted as familiar, not because it truly happened before, but because the brain has already processed it once, just milliseconds earlier. From the brain's perspective, that is enough to trigger the sensation of familiarity. To your conscious mind, however, the experience feels inexplicable. You did not notice the first processing. You only notice the feeling that follows. And because your brain is constantly trying to make sense of its own signals, it presents you with the simplest explanation it can offer. This moment has already happened. Déjà vu is not the brain remembering the past. It is the brain mislabeling the present. This mislabeling becomes more likely under certain conditions. Fatigue, stress, and divided attention all increase the chance that the brain's timing will slip. When you are tired, your neural processing becomes less synchronized. When you are stressed, your attention jumps rapidly from one thing to another. When you multitask, your brain constantly switches between streams of information. All of these states make it easier for information to be processed unevenly, creating the perfect environment for familiarity to appear without context. That is why many people report experiencing déjà vu during periods of mental overload or emotional tension. There is another important factor at play: prediction. As you move through the world, your brain is constantly guessing what will happen next. It predicts the layout of a room as you enter it, the rhythm of a conversation as it unfolds, the sequence of events in familiar routines. When reality matches these predictions closely, the experience feels smooth and effortless. But sometimes, the prediction itself becomes so strong that it feels like memory. When your brain accurately anticipates what you are about to perceive, the resulting match can trigger a sense of familiarity that feels indistinguishable from having experienced the moment before. In this sense, déjà vu reveals something deeply unsettling about perception. What you experience as the present is not purely a reaction to the external world. It is a collaboration between incoming sensory data and internal expectations. Most of the time, this collaboration works seamlessly. You are not aware of the predictions guiding your perception. But during déjà vu, the balance is disrupted. The prediction overwhelms the perception, and the brain briefly treats the present moment as if it were a replay. What makes this even more fascinating is how quickly the illusion collapses. The moment you focus on the feeling, the moment you try to analyze it, it begins to fade. This is because déjà vu exists at a level of processing just below conscious awareness. Once higher cognitive systems engage, they demand evidence. They search for memories, timelines, and context. When none are found, the brain corrects itself. The feeling dissolves, leaving behind only the memory of having experienced it. You cannot hold on to déjà vu because it was never meant to be held. It is a byproduct of systems that operate faster than thought. As strange as it may sound, déjà vu is not a sign that something is wrong with your brain. On the contrary, it is evidence that your brain is highly efficient. The same predictive mechanisms that occasionally produce déjà vu are the ones that allow you to navigate complex environments with ease. They help you recognize patterns, anticipate outcomes, and react quickly to potential threats. Déjà vu is the cost of having a brain that prioritizes speed and survival over perfect accuracy. And yet, despite these explanations, something about déjà vu continues to disturb us. Perhaps it is because it exposes the fragile nature of our sense of reality. We like to believe that what we experience is a direct reflection of the world as it is. Déjà vu reminds us that this is not entirely true. What we experience is filtered, constructed, and sometimes misinterpreted by the brain. Most of the time we never notice. But during déjà vu, the illusion cracks just enough for us to glimpse the machinery behind it. And this leads to an even more uncomfortable question, one that goes beyond memory and familiarity. If your brain can so easily convince you that the present has already happened, even for a moment, what else might it be convincing you of without your awareness? Segunda part. If your brain can momentarily convince you that the present has already happened, then déjà vu is not just a curious experience. It is a window into how fragile and malleable perception truly is. To understand this more deeply, we need to look at how the brain normally decides what feels real, what feels remembered, and what feels entirely new. Most of this process happens silently, outside your awareness, guided by systems that evolved long before conscious thought became central to human experience. At the core of this process lies the brain's familiarity system, a mechanism designed to rapidly assess whether something has been encountered before. This system does not ask detailed questions. It does not search for full memories or narrative context. Its job is simple and fast: flag situations as known or unknown. When something is flagged as familiar, your brain assumes it can relax slightly. When something is unfamiliar, alertness increases. This binary decision happens constantly and automatically, and under normal circumstances, it works remarkably well. However, familiarity is not truth. It is a signal, not a conclusion. And like any signal, it can be triggered incorrectly. Déjà vu occurs when the familiarity signal is activated without sufficient evidence. The brain says known, even though the experience is objectively new. The conscious mind then scrambles to explain this mismatch. Because humans are meaning-making creatures, the brain offers the most plausible explanation it can generate in that moment. This has happened before. One reason this explanation feels so convincing is because familiarity is emotionally charged. It is not a neutral sensation. Familiarity carries a subtle sense of safety, coherence, and certainty. When that emotional weight appears suddenly and without context, it can feel overwhelming. This is why déjà vu is often described as eerie rather than neutral. It is not just confusing. It feels important, as if the brain is drawing attention to something significant. Neuroscientific research suggests that this emotional intensity is linked to the limbic system, the network of brain structures involved in emotion, motivation, and memory. When the familiarity signal activates abnormally, it can stimulate emotional circuits that amplify the experience. Your heart rate may change slightly. Your awareness may sharpen. For a brief moment, the world feels different, almost heightened. This is not because anything external has changed, but because your internal interpretation of the moment has shifted. Another factor that contributes to déjà vu is context similarity. The brain does not store experiences as exact copies. Instead, it encodes patterns, relationships, and structures. When a new situation closely resembles the structure of a previous one, even if the details are different, the brain may respond as if it recognizes it. A room with a similar layout, a conversation with a familiar rhythm, or a sequence of actions that matches an old pattern can all trigger a sense of familiarity without recalling a specific memory. In these cases, the brain recognizes the pattern, not the event. This pattern recognition ability is one of the brain's greatest strengths. It allows you to generalize from past experience, adapt to new situations, and learn efficiently. But it also introduces ambiguity. When patterns overlap too closely, the brain may confuse similarity with identity. Déjà vu emerges from this confusion. It is the brain saying, "This fits a pattern I know," even though the details are new. Attention plays a critical role here as well. Déjà vu is more likely to occur when attention is slightly disrupted. When your focus is split or drifting, information enters the brain in fragments rather than as a unified whole. Later, when your attention snaps back, the brain may interpret the partially processed information as something it has already encountered. This creates a powerful illusion of repetition. In reality, the brain is catching up to itself. This explains why déjà vu often happens during mundane activities. Walking through a doorway, turning a corner, or engaging in routine conversations all involve brief shifts in attention. The brain predicts what will happen next, fills in gaps, and moves on. Occasionally, these predictions become conscious sensations. When they do, the result can feel uncanny. It is also worth noting that déjà vu tends to occur more frequently in people who are highly attentive to their internal experiences. Individuals who reflect deeply, imagine vividly, or engage in abstract thinking may be more aware of subtle shifts in perception. This does not mean that they experience déjà vu more often in absolute terms, but that they notice it more clearly when it happens. Awareness amplifies the experience, turning a fleeting signal into a memorable event. Interestingly, déjà vu rarely lasts more than a few seconds. This brevity is not accidental. Once the brain realizes that no supporting memory can be found, it corrects itself. The familiarity signal is suppressed and normal perception resumes. This rapid correction highlights the brain's ability to self-monitor and adjust. Even when it makes a mistake, it does not cling to it. It moves on. Yet the memory of the experience remains. You remember that you felt déjà vu even though you cannot explain why. This memory can linger, prompting reflection and sometimes unease. It challenges your assumptions about how memory and perception work. It raises questions about the reliability of your own mind. And in doing so, it invites a deeper examination of consciousness itself. Because if your brain can generate a convincing sense of familiarity without a real memory, then familiarity is not proof of truth. It is a feeling, not a fact. This realization has implications far beyond déjà vu. It suggests that many of the certainties you experience in daily life may be constructed in similar ways, shaped by prediction, emotion, and pattern recognition rather than objective reality. And this brings us to an even deeper layer of the phenomenon. Déjà vu is not just about memory or familiarity. It is about time. When you feel déjà vu, the boundary between past and present blurs. The present moment is experienced as if it belongs to the past. This temporal confusion reveals how the brain normally maintains a sense of continuity. Time, as you experience it, is not a direct perception. It is an interpretation, assembled from memory, attention, and expectation. Under normal conditions, this interpretation is seamless. You feel as though time flows naturally from one moment to the next. Déjà vu disrupts this flow. It inserts a false echo into the present, making it feel as though time has looped back on itself. For a brief moment, the arrow of time feels uncertain. This uncertainty is deeply unsettling because it challenges one of the most fundamental assumptions of human experience, that the present is new. When the present feels repeated, even briefly, it shakes your sense of causality and control. It suggests that your experience of reality is less stable than you might like to believe. And yet, the brain allows this disruption to happen. It does not shut down the system entirely to prevent such errors. Why? Because the benefits of prediction, pattern recognition, and rapid processing far outweigh the occasional confusion. Déjà vu is the price paid for a brain that is constantly trying to stay one step ahead of reality. As unsettling as it may feel, déjà vu is not a malfunction. It is a side effect of intelligence. It is the echo of a brain that evolved to anticipate, interpret, and survive in a complex world. When that echo becomes audible, you notice it. And when you notice it, you are briefly confronted with the limits of your own perception. And this leads us toward a question that is even more unsettling than the experience itself. If déjà vu can distort your sense of time and familiarity so easily, what does that say about the reliability of your perception in moments when you feel completely certain? Tercera part. If déjà vu can distort your sense of time and familiarity so easily, then the experience forces you to confront an uncomfortable truth about perception. The feeling of certainty you associate with knowing something is not proof that it is real. It is proof that your brain has decided it is real. And those two things are not always the same. Déjà vu exposes the gap between experience and explanation, between what you feel and what actually happened. One of the reasons this gap feels so disturbing is that human consciousness depends heavily on continuity. Your sense of self is built on the idea that each moment flows naturally into the next, forming a coherent story. Déjà vu interrupts that story. It inserts a false sense of repetition into the narrative, creating the impression that the present moment is out of place. For a brief instant, the structure of your experience feels unstable, as if reality has slipped slightly out of alignment. This instability reveals how much of your experience is inferred rather than perceived. You do not experience the world moment by moment in raw form. Your brain constantly fills in gaps, smooths transitions, and resolves ambiguities before you ever become aware of them. Déjà vu occurs when this smoothing process becomes visible. It is not a window into another time or dimension. It is a glimpse of the construction process itself. What makes this especially fascinating is that the brain does not treat this as an error that must be eliminated at all costs. Instead, it tolerates it. The predictive systems that produce déjà vu are so essential to survival that occasional misfires are acceptable. In fact, they are inevitable. A brain that waited for perfect certainty before acting would be too slow to survive. Speed matters more than precision. Déjà vu is the cost of that speed. This also explains why déjà vu is so difficult to reproduce under controlled conditions. It depends on subtle fluctuations in attention, timing, and prediction that are hard to replicate on demand. It emerges spontaneously, disappears quickly, and leaves behind more questions than answers. The brain does not announce when it is about to make a mistake. It simply corrects itself and moves on. Yet the memory of the experience lingers, precisely because it feels so vivid and meaningful. Even though it lasts only seconds, déjà vu leaves a lasting impression. It feels like a message without content, a signal without instructions. People often search for deeper explanations, sometimes turning to supernatural or mystical interpretations. But the scientific explanation is in many ways more unsettling. It suggests that your sense of certainty is not grounded in truth, but in neural signals that evolved for efficiency rather than accuracy. This realization extends beyond déjà vu. Every moment of perception is shaped by similar processes. Your brain constantly predicts what you are about to see, hear, and feel. When those predictions align with reality, you experience confidence and clarity. When they do not, you experience confusion, surprise, or error. Déjà vu is simply one of the rare moments when this predictive machinery becomes visible to you. Understanding this does not make the experience less strange. In fact, it often makes it more unsettling. Because once you recognize that your brain can mislabel the present as the past, you are forced to question how often similar mislabeling happens without your awareness. How many of your certainties are based on prediction rather than evidence? How often does familiarity guide your decisions without justification? Déjà vu reminds you that perception is not a passive process. It is an active construction. Your brain is constantly interpreting signals, assigning meaning, and generating a sense of reality that feels immediate and unquestionable. Most of the time, this construction works so well that you never notice it. But during déjà vu, the illusion briefly falters. And in that moment, you glimpse the machinery behind your experience. Perhaps that is why déjà vu feels so profound. It is not just a strange sensation. It is a reminder of how little control you have over the processes that shape your reality. It shows you that your experience of the world is not as solid as it seems. It is flexible, predictive, and occasionally wrong. The next time you experience déjà vu, you may still feel that familiar jolt of confusion, but you will also know what it represents. Not a memory from the past. Not a message from the future. But a moment when your brain's prediction system briefly overshadowed perception, convincing you that now had already happened. And this realization leads naturally to an even deeper question. If your brain can create a false sense of familiarity so convincingly, what else might it be constructing without your awareness? How many of your thoughts, feelings, and certainties are the result of prediction rather than reality? That question is not just philosophical. It sits at the center of how consciousness works. And it is exactly where our next exploration begins. Cord apart. If experiences like déjà vu reveal how easily perception can be constructed, then it becomes impossible to ignore a larger pattern emerging beneath the surface. The human brain does not wait for reality to fully arrive before responding to it. It anticipates, prepares, and often decides before conscious awareness catches up. This anticipatory nature is not a flaw. It is the very reason you can function efficiently in a world that changes faster than conscious thought can process. But it also means that your experience of the present is always slightly ahead of itself. If you find yourself drawn to these hidden mechanisms of the mind and the quiet ways the brain shapes what feels real, this is exactly the kind of exploration we continue here. Understanding how perception works is not just interesting. It changes how you see your own experiences. To understand why déjà vu feels so convincing, we need to look more closely at how the brain constructs the sense of now. The present moment, as you experience it, is not a single instant. It is a short window of time that the brain stitches together into a coherent whole. This window allows your brain to integrate sensory input, emotional context, and predictions into something that feels immediate and continuous. Without this integration, experience would feel fragmented and chaotic. Déjà vu occurs when something interferes with this stitching process. The brain briefly loses track of whether a piece of information belongs to the present or has already been processed. The result is not confusion in the traditional sense, but a subtle duplication of awareness. The present moment feels as if it has already passed through the system once before. This duplication is not perceived consciously as two separate events. Instead, it manifests as a single, powerful sensation of familiarity. What makes this sensation so compelling is that it bypasses rational evaluation. You do not reason your way into déjà vu. It arrives fully formed, carrying with it a sense of certainty that feels undeniable. This is because the familiarity signal originates in systems that evolved long before language and abstract reasoning. These systems are designed to act quickly and decisively. When they speak, consciousness listens. In everyday life, you rely on this mechanism constantly. You recognize safe environments, familiar faces, and predictable situations without effort. You trust these signals because they are usually accurate. Déjà vu challenges this trust by showing that even the most convincing internal signals can be wrong. It reveals that certainty is not evidence. It is a feeling generated by neural activity. This realization can be unsettling, but it is also liberating. Once you understand that perception is constructed, you gain a new perspective on your own thoughts and reactions. You begin to notice how often familiarity guides your decisions without conscious justification. You may feel drawn to certain ideas, people, or situations simply because they trigger a sense of recognition, even when you cannot explain why. Déjà vu is an extreme example of this process, but the underlying mechanism operates constantly in the background of your mind. There is also a deeper connection between déjà vu and imagination. The brain uses many of the same neural circuits for imagining events as it does for remembering them. When you imagine something vividly, the brain activates patterns similar to those involved in perception. Over time, these imagined scenarios can influence how new experiences are interpreted. A situation that resembles something you once imagined, dreamed, or mentally rehearsed may trigger a sense of familiarity even though it never actually occurred. In this way, the boundary between memory and imagination becomes blurred. This overlap helps explain why déjà vu is sometimes linked to dreams. Dreams create rich, immersive experiences without external input. They allow the brain to explore scenarios, patterns, and emotions freely. When a real-life situation later resembles the structure of a dream, even loosely, the familiarity system may respond. The brain recognizes the pattern, not the source. The result is a feeling that reality is echoing something that already exists inside your mind. If this perspective resonates with you, it may be because you have noticed similar moments in your own experience. Many people have felt that unsettling sense of recognition triggered by places, conversations, or events that should be entirely new. If you have ever experienced this yourself, noticing it rather than dismissing it can be surprisingly revealing. These moments offer insight into how your mind works beneath the surface. As you move through life, your brain continuously balances two opposing demands: speed and accuracy. It must respond quickly enough to keep you safe, but accurately enough to keep you oriented in reality. Déjà vu emerges at the intersection of these demands. It is what happens when speed briefly wins over accuracy. The brain prioritizes rapid interpretation over careful verification, and consciousness experiences the result. Importantly, this does not mean your brain is unreliable in a general sense. On the contrary, it means your brain is optimized for survival rather than philosophical consistency. In most situations, acting quickly based on familiarity is far more useful than waiting for certainty. Déjà vu is the rare moment when this optimization becomes visible, when the trade-off between speed and precision enters awareness. This trade-off extends far beyond déjà vu. It influences how you judge people, interpret situations, and make decisions every day. Familiar ideas feel more trustworthy. Repeated information feels more true. Recognized patterns feel more meaningful. The brain's reliance on familiarity shapes your perception of reality in subtle but powerful ways. If you are finding yourself reflecting on these ideas, consider how often familiarity influences your beliefs without your noticing. Have you ever felt drawn to an explanation simply because it felt right, not because it was supported by evidence? Experiences like déjà vu remind us that feeling right and being right are not always the same. Understanding this distinction is one of the most important steps toward understanding the human mind. It invites humility about our perceptions and curiosity about our experiences. And it opens the door to deeper questions about consciousness, memory, and the nature of reality itself. These questions do not have simple answers, but exploring them changes how you relate to your own thoughts and sensations. It encourages you to observe your mind rather than simply trust it. And that shift in perspective is often where real understanding begins. Keen apart. As these layers come together, déjà vu stops feeling like an isolated anomaly and starts to look more like a symptom of something much broader. It is not just about memory, familiarity, or prediction taken individually. It is about how all of these systems interact to create the feeling of a stable reality. Most of the time, this interaction is so smooth that you never question it. You simply move through the world assuming that what you perceive is what is happening. Déjà vu briefly disrupts that assumption, revealing how much interpretation is involved in even the simplest experiences. What makes this disruption so striking is that it exposes the illusion of immediacy. You feel as though you are experiencing the present moment directly, but in truth, your brain is always slightly ahead of you. It predicts what you are about to see, hear, and feel, then compares those predictions with incoming information. When the match is close enough, the experience feels seamless. When the match is imperfect, you notice a disturbance. Déjà vu is one of the clearest examples of that disturbance becoming conscious. This also explains why déjà vu does not point backward in time but inward. It does not reveal something about your past. It reveals something about your brain. It shows you how strongly your sense of reality depends on internal processes that operate beyond your awareness. When those processes briefly lose alignment, the result feels mysterious, even unsettling, because it challenges the foundation of your everyday experience. There is something deeply human about being disturbed by déjà vu. Humans rely on narrative to make sense of the world. You understand your life as a sequence of events unfolding in time. Déjà vu interrupts that narrative. It inserts a false repetition, a moment that feels out of place. For an instant, the story of your experience does not make sense. And when meaning collapses, even briefly, the mind reacts strongly. This reaction often drives people to search for extraordinary explanations. Ideas about time loops, parallel realities, or glimpses of the future are tempting because they preserve the sense that the experience is meaningful. But the scientific explanation, while less dramatic on the surface, is more profound in its implications. It suggests that meaning itself is something the brain constructs. Déjà vu feels meaningful not because it reveals hidden knowledge, but because it activates systems designed to signal importance. Understanding this does not make the experience disappear. You will still feel déjà vu when it happens. The sensation will still arrive suddenly and fade quickly. But your relationship to it changes. Instead of interpreting it as a message or anomaly, you can recognize it as a moment when the brain's predictive machinery briefly became visible. A moment when the process of perception revealed itself. This perspective invites a deeper form of curiosity. Rather than asking what déjà vu means, you begin to ask how meaning itself is generated. How many of your everyday certainties are grounded in prediction rather than direct evidence? How often does familiarity guide your judgments without your awareness? Déjà vu is rare enough to feel special, but the mechanisms behind it are active all the time. This realization can be unsettling, but it can also be empowering. When you understand that perception is constructed, you gain the ability to question it. You become more attentive to the difference between what feels true and what is supported by evidence. You begin to notice the subtle ways your mind fills in gaps, smooths over inconsistencies, and creates coherence where none objectively exists. In this sense, déjà vu is not just a curiosity. It is a reminder. A reminder that consciousness is not a passive window onto reality, but an active process that constantly interprets, predicts, and revises. Most of the time this process serves you well. But occasionally it reveals its own limits. If this exploration has changed the way you think about your own experiences, you are not alone. Many people find that understanding the mechanics of the mind makes everyday life feel subtly different. Moments of certainty become more interesting. Feelings of familiarity become more questionable. And experiences like déjà vu become less frightening and more revealing. If you are interested in continuing these deep dives into how the human brain quietly shapes reality, consider subscribing to the channel. We explore these hidden mechanisms not as abstract theories, but as living processes that influence your thoughts, perceptions, and decisions every day. And if you have experienced déjà vu yourself in a way that felt especially intense or unsettling, share that experience in the comments. These moments are more common than people admit, and discussing them often reveals patterns that are easy to miss alone. In the next exploration, we will go even deeper into this territory by examining why experiences that are false can feel more real than reality itself. Why emotions, memories, and perceptions can carry a sense of certainty that logic cannot undo. And what this reveals about the fragile boundary between what you experience and what actually is. Because once you understand déjà vu, you begin to realize that it is only one example of a much larger truth. The brain does not simply reflect reality. It creates it. And that realization changes everything. To truly understand why déjà vu feels so powerful, it helps to compare it with other moments when the brain creates certainty out of incomplete information. One of the closest relatives of déjà vu is the phenomenon of false memory. False memories are not lies or imagination. They are experiences where the brain constructs a memory that feels as real as a genuine one, complete with emotion, confidence, and detail. What makes false memories disturbing is not that they exist, but that they feel indistinguishable from real memories while they are happening. Déjà vu and false memories share a common foundation. In both cases, the brain prioritizes coherence over accuracy. It would rather give you a convincing story than leave you in uncertainty. When information is incomplete or ambiguous, the brain fills the gap. With false memories, it fills the gap retroactively, reconstructing the past. With déjà vu, it fills the gap immediately, mislabeling the present. In both situations, the sensation of certainty comes first, and verification comes later, if it comes at all. Another closely related phenomenon is time distortion. Many people report moments when time seems to slow down, speed up, or stretch unnaturally. These experiences often occur during intense emotional states, stress, or deep focus. Once again, the common thread is prediction. Time, like memory, is not perceived directly. It is inferred. Your brain estimates the passage of time based on attention, change, and expectation. When those factors shift, your experience of time shifts with them. Déjà vu briefly disrupts the brain's timeline. It creates the impression that the present moment belongs somewhere else on that timeline. This is why some people describe déjà vu as feeling out of place, rather than simply familiar. The moment feels misfiled, as if it has been pulled from the wrong folder in the brain's internal archive. That misplacement is not random. It reflects how closely intertwined memory, time, and perception truly are. These glitches reveal an important truth. Your brain is constantly organizing experience into a narrative, even when the raw data does not fully support it. Narrative gives structure to consciousness. It tells you where you are, what just happened, and what is likely to happen next. Déjà vu momentarily disrupts that narrative, inserting a false repetition that does not belong. The discomfort you feel is not fear of the experience itself, but resistance to narrative collapse. Humans are deeply uncomfortable with ambiguity. When something does not fit into a clear story, the mind reacts. Déjà vu forces the brain to confront ambiguity head-on. It creates a sensation that demands explanation but offers none. That tension is what makes the experience linger in memory long after it ends. There is also an important individual difference in how people experience déjà vu. Some people report it rarely while others experience it more frequently. This does not necessarily mean their brains are malfunctioning. In many cases, it reflects differences in attention, imagination, and cognitive flexibility. Brains that are highly sensitive to patterns and internal states may be more likely to notice these subtle mismatches when they occur. Awareness amplifies experience. This does not mean that déjà vu is a sign of special ability or insight. It simply means that some minds are more attuned to the internal signals that usually remain unnoticed. In that sense, déjà vu is less about how often it happens and more about whether it is registered consciously. Many people likely experience micro-moments of misfiring familiarity without ever labeling them as such. Another factor that deserves attention is expectation. When you know about déjà vu, you are more likely to notice it. Awareness creates a feedback loop. The experience itself does not change, but your interpretation of it does. This is why learning about the brain can sometimes make experiences feel more vivid. Knowledge sharpens perception. It does not create the phenomenon, but it brings it into focus. What makes déjà vu especially valuable from a scientific perspective is that it reveals the limits of introspection. No matter how carefully you examine your own experience, you cannot directly observe the processes that produce it. Déjà vu is one of the rare moments when the result of those processes becomes visible without revealing the process itself. You see the output, not the mechanism. And that gap between cause and effect is where curiosity thrives. This gap also explains why déjà vu has inspired so many myths and interpretations throughout history. When an experience feels meaningful but resists explanation, humans naturally look beyond ordinary causes. But neuroscience suggests something more subtle and, in many ways, more profound. Déjà vu does not point to hidden knowledge about the universe. It points to hidden knowledge about yourself. It shows you that your sense of reality is not anchored in certainty, but in probability. Your brain constantly weighs possibilities and chooses the most likely interpretation. Most of the time this works flawlessly. But occasionally the system reveals its own approximations. Déjà vu is one such reveal. Seen this way, déjà vu becomes less mysterious and more instructive. It teaches you that feeling certain does not guarantee truth. It reminds you that perception is an active process, shaped by expectations, memory fragments, and emotional context. And it invites you to question other moments of certainty in your life. How often do you trust a feeling simply because it feels familiar? How often does recognition influence your choices without conscious reasoning? Déjà vu magnifies these questions by compressing them into a single, unforgettable moment. It is a concentrated demonstration of how the mind constructs reality. As this understanding settles in, déjà vu may begin to feel less like an anomaly and more like a reminder. A reminder that your brain is always working ahead of you, predicting, interpreting, and adjusting. A reminder that consciousness is not a mirror but a model. And a reminder that even the most convincing experiences can be the result of invisible processes quietly shaping what you believe to be real. When you place déjà vu alongside false memories, time distortion, and predictive perception, a consistent pattern emerges. The brain is not designed to show you the world as it is. It is designed to help you navigate it efficiently. Accuracy is important, but speed and coherence are often more important. Déjà vu is what happens when that balance briefly tilts. And this brings us naturally to what comes next. If the brain can generate such powerful illusions of familiarity and certainty, then déjà vu is only one example of a much broader phenomenon. There are many other moments when the mind convinces you of something that feels undeniably real, even when it is not. Understanding those moments reveals even more about how consciousness operates. That is exactly where the next exploration leads. Not into speculation but deeper into the mechanisms that make false experiences feel real. Because once you understand déjà vu fully, you begin to see that it is not an isolated glitch. It is part of a larger pattern that quietly shapes your experience of reality every single day.